Happy Tuesday, everyone. My name is Sierra Ladroma. I have recently joined the team as a project manager for the Iowa Center's Women's Business Center. Our office has not only moved to a new physical location, but we have currently transitioned to virtual services. Now, the Iowa Center's Women's Business Center is funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration. It's incredible to be able to bring inspiring entrepreneurs, workshops, and events to the community. Now, many of you would have received a form to complete. Please do so after this event. This information allows us to continue providing free educational programming for small business owners in Iowa. I'll also put that form in the chat option for you to easily get to. Feel free to use the chat option to add questions or comments. Today's presenter is Anna Mason. Anna joined the PI Midwest team in 2019 after a 13-year career in the beauty industry as a stylist and a manager. She is known for relating to customers, coaching and mentoring staff, and recruiting valuable team members. Prior to her career in the beauty industry, she worked as a social worker conducting trainings in Spanish that helped educate Latino families on community issues in Marshalltown, Iowa. Anna grew up in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and currently represents the PI Midwest in Des Moines, Iowa. Now, please join me in a virtual waving welcome to our presenter, Anna Mason.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today with everybody. As mentioned, I'm an associate with PI Midwest, which is, we consult with the Predictive Index, which is a behavioral assessment tool. We sell that tool to businesses and we train on it. And what it does is help them hire the right people, put them in the right seats, and coach people to perform their best. I'm also, so as I mentioned, I'm a half trainer, half salesperson. So today we're going to be talking about customer-focused selling, which sometimes have negative and scary connotations. Selling can. So today I'm going to try and reframe it so it's a little bit more relatable. Now more than ever, selling products and services is really all about building and maintaining relationships. I think what a lot of people are discovering right now during COVID times is that strong relationships are what is carrying them through. It's keeping them strong, or at least maintaining their business. And some businesses are even growing as a result of strong connections and relationships. So really quick before we get started, as an icebreaker, we're going to start with a poll. So I'm going to launch that. When you think of selling, what do you feel? You have three options: fear, dread, excitement, or no feeling. We got about 91%. That's good. I'm going to end the polling and share these results. So 48% said they have fear and dread, 43% excitement, which is awesome, and 10% no feeling. Now, if you're someone who chose fear and dread, but you're like, sometimes I have excitement, that's acceptable as well. I just wanted to get a temperature read there. And I'm going to take note of these numbers for later. Okay, so I'm going to get out of that. And actually, I am going to hide some control panels here, if I may. And I am going to stop my video for just a few minutes, if that's okay. So if you'll indulge me here, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the work that I do. The Predictive Index is a behavioral assessment tool, as I told you, and it's a management development tool that's been used since 1955. What it does is measure long-term predictable behavior in workplaces. This is really helpful for a lot of employers because it helps them understand the basic motivating drives and needs of their employees. And this can help take some of the feeling out of coaching, and it's also used in hiring, so sometimes it can take the feeling out of hiring. You're looking at basic motivating drives and needs. It's also a great self-awareness tool. It helps people not only understand others, but also themselves and how they'll relate and interact with others, so it can be used in building emotional intelligence. A little bit on behavior, just so that you understand a little bit about what the Predictive Index does. If you only look at how people behave, you're guessing at what motivates and drives them. So why is it important to understand motivating drives and needs? Because if you can measure motivating drives and needs, you can better predict behavior, and you can better understand how people will react in certain situations, especially under stress and pressure. You can better predict how to motivate them to get the behavior you want for your workplace. So that's why a lot of people sign up for this tool. It is important, I do want to mention that PI doesn't measure morals or interests or ethics or even emotional intelligence. All of those things can change over time. But what doesn't change, they've discovered, is an individual's basic motivating drives and needs. What motivates people drives behavior. So I'm not going to go into too in depth with this, and if you've taken a behavioral assessment tool, maybe this will sound familiar. But PI measures the presence or the absence of 4 major drives. The first is dominance, which is the drive to exert one's influence on people or events. Extroversion, the drive for social interaction with other people. Patience, the drive for consistency and stability. And then finally, formality, the drive to conform to rules and structure. And as I read this, maybe you know exactly where you fall in all of these, high or low. So why do companies want to know more about their employees' motivating drives and needs? It's not just to hire the right people, but also to motivate them so that they stick around. And that's not just because it's the compassionate, right thing to do. Ultimately, it saves businesses money, and that's one of the reasons they sign up. I love this quote. Here, I'll read it quickly. Enjoyment appears at the boundary between boredom and anxiety, when the challenges are just balanced with the person's capacity to act. I love this quote, and I tell this to my clients. If you understand your people, they won't live in boredom or anxiety. They're going to live in a place where they feel challenged and comfortable to do their work, and that's why they're going to stay. So I'm going to turn my video on here again and show that. So I'm going to ask some folks I'm going to ask you to do some thinking and maybe some sharing in chat here. We talked a little bit about fear and excitement, and I want to know a little bit specifically about what your selling baggage is. So if you could take a minute and maybe write down on a piece of paper or just think about it, some fears, maybe a fear you have of selling, if it's specific, a joy or an excitement, and any specific challenge. So I'm going to give you a minute just to do that. And Mary raised her hand. As you're thinking about those, thanks, Chris, for chatting. If you could enter in maybe some joys and fears, and we'll have a little conversation about this. While people are typing into the chat, Chris said rejection and the no. So I assume that that's a fear, and that is a huge one. Does anyone else have any fears or even joys or specific challenges that they'd like to share? Oh, perfect. Fear, customer complaints and refunds. So yeah, that's a good one. A joy, let's see here. I'm gonna go back up. Joy, meeting the customer's needs. Fear, not able to provide what they need, not understanding what they want. Oh, that's really good. People saying no, not liking my product. Fear of selling can coincide with, with confrontation. That's good. It's a really good one. Problem solving. I like that one. Problem solving. That's a really great one for a joy, I assume. Joy is money. When you make the big sell, seeing a positive result. Fear, being told no, coming across as inauthentic. Joy, connecting with people with something they can really help them. That's perfect. Challenges, my product costs nothing and I still can't get people to hear my pitch. Okay, I hope that we have some tips today. Profit margin, joy when a customer is excited about the purchase they just made. It's just what they wanted, so you met their needs. Challenge is not being able to sell face-to-face during COVID. That's a really timely one. Doing custom items people want. I feel like I missed some. So I heard a lot of really great fears and joys. I think that I'm hoping today that I will be able to provide and again reframe selling as building a relationship. I think a lot of times selling, we think of it as we make our pitch, we get we land the sale, and then it's done. And I think that if we can reframe selling as building a relationship, then that gives you a little bit more time to make your pitch, a little bit more time to get that sale and build that relationship. We have a few more challenges. Challenge targeting with specific products within my existing client base, keeping track of leads and how to reapproach later. That's a good question. And Leah, I'd be happy to talk to you maybe individually on some systems that might help with that. Fear, appearing pushy, conveying the value without losing them. Joys, knowing that clients will be better off. Challenging, finding the ideal people for my product. Those are all really good ones. So today we're going to be talking about a lot of different ways to build relationships, which is really specific. So as a follow-up to this, I am going to be sharing my contact information, and I'd be happy to talk about some of the specific challenges that I don't address in this webinar, just to have someone to bounce ideas off of. I'm an expert as much as you are, but sometimes it helps to just have someone who's not in the eye of the storm, so to speak, to bounce ideas off of. So I'm going to stop this video again and hide our video panel. Got one more chat. I like this, TJ. Thank you. My biggest challenge is myself. Sometimes I get lazy, so you have to hold yourself accountable. I like that. I did want to share some of my fears and joys, and I think that these were mentioned in the chat. One of my fears is that they won't see the value in my product and they just won't want to pay the price that I'm asking for. And someone mentioned this, I really am fearful of coming across as pushy or salesy. The joy though for me, and this is why I chose this topic today, is building a relationship with my client and over time satisfying their needs, solving their problems, knowing that they trust me to help them with their business. So let's talk about behavior and what understanding behavior has to do with selling. And the fact is, it really doesn't have anything to do with selling unless you look at it selling as building a relationship. So going back to the basics of measuring motivating drives and needs, if you understand what drives a person and what they're truly motivated by, then you can meet their needs. When dealing with clients, you really have to understand what they want and what they need. As this slide illustrates, you have to understand their world. And you don't have to do a behavioral assessment on your clients, although that helps. I'm hoping that today I can lay out a few ways you can get to know their needs without doing an assessment. As you can see in this slide, a mistake that people often make when selling is that they focus more on their own world as opposed to the world of the client. And customer-focused selling is what turns this around. So when you take time to invest in the client's world, so to speak, you'll have a lot more success simply because you're understanding what they truly want and need, and then you're satisfying those needs. So this is kind of a perspective shift, but perspective shifts create better conversations. If you can do this, if you can always keep this in mind, that you're selling to the client's world, you're going to sell faster, you're going to sell more often. Ultimately, you're going to build a long-term relationship, and that's what's going to pay you back tenfold over time. So trust, let's talk a little bit about what goes into building a long-term relationship, and a lot of us know this in our personal lives, but trust is really what it's all about. Trust and selling don't traditionally go hand in hand. When we talked about baggage earlier, our selling baggage that we have as salespeople, one of the things I mentioned that my baggage is that I don't like to come across as pushy. And that's because, frankly, I don't care for that approach when people are selling to me. And someone mentioned this in the chat. It comes across as inauthentic to me, and inauthentic doesn't equal trust, right? So my baggage as a consumer is the same as my baggage as a salesperson. And it really, what it all comes down to is trust. Oftentimes sales don't get off the ground because of trust, but building trust is how you're going to make the sale. So how do you do that? You have to demonstrate that you understand what your client wants. You have to deliver on what they want, and you have to anticipate what they want and deliver on that. So as it sums up in this orange box here, clients must trust that you want to help them, that you can help them, and that you will help them. And all this has to be done from their perspective. So let's get into the steps of building a sales relationship. I'm going to talk about first impressions, and this is going to sound a little bit cliche, but every second does count. I want to dig into a little bit about why first impressions are so important. And it's because they're formed intuitively. They're an emotional reaction. When you walk into the room, no one actively thinks, oh, I trust that person. They feel that they trust that person. They feel that they trust you. So I'm going to turn my video back on so we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation if we can. Let's just, in the chat if you would, how do you elicit trust in a first encounter? What are some ideas of how you do that already or when it's been done for you? You build rapport, perfect. Smile is big, so that's good and specific. Smile is important. Any other ways that you build trust? How about respect? Good eye contact, smile, and be sincere. Excellent. Ask and listen. I love that, Robert. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Listen, good job. Perfect. If there's any other ideas? Hard with a mask. That's so true. We are learning new things. If anyone ever watched that show, it's Tyra Banks, the model one. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? She always talked about smiling with your eyes. Yes. Posture. Ooh, good job, Ben. That's perfect. Yes, smiles. Yes, smiles. Yes, smiling with your eyes. Absolutely. I love these. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next. We kind of talked about, so you guys had some perfect examples of how you elicit trust and build respect. So I'm going to dig into the emotional responses that you get from first impressions. We're going to talk about verbal, we're going to talk about vocal and visual. I'm going to stop this so I can see myself here. Sorry about that. So first things first, verbal is what we say, and this is words you choose, vocabulary, grammar, and jargon, right? So what I'm saying is obviously important because I'm talking about a topic that I'm an expert in, but it's important to not use like and like if you can. Are you using proper grammar? Are you using jargon? This is really important because a lot of times people use jargon that clients don't understand, and that can be alienating. Vocal, building trust with how we sound. That's tonality, pitch, pace of speech, and volume. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but is your tone flat or are you using inflection for emphasis? How about your pitch? Do you end all your sentences with the sentence going up, kind of in an up speak, or are you using down speak? I would argue that down speak has more emphasis typically. Pace of speech, that's pretty self-explanatory. You don't want to go too fast. That can lose trust in a relationship because of the intensity, and same with volume. And then finally, visual, which is really important, how we appear. A lot of people mention smiling. So this is our body language, our posture, gestures, facial expressions, eye contact, and attire. You know, standing up with your shoulders back, not having your hands stuffed in your pocket, smiling, nodding, eyebrows raised, shows that you are listening. Are you looking at them or around the room? And then finally, attire. Does it match your audience? So that's probably not all any new information. I am going to show you a few percentages on the impact of each of these. I'm sure in your head you can take a guess of what you think the individual impact is. So this is the latest. 90% of our communication is nonverbal. I think a lot of us knew that. That's really interesting when you think about only 7% of what you say matters. And I think personally, it's what I probably spend the most on, is thinking about what I'm going to say, when really I should be focusing a little bit more on my body language and the sound of my voice, that sort of thing. Now, this relates to a challenge that we're having right now in these times. How do you sell by phone? How do you sell by Zoom? I was talking with Sierra before this started that, we do have Zoom cameras, but the camera's so small, it really limits a lot of the visual that we are so accustomed to using to understand how someone's relating to us. And it's super challenging. And over the phone is the same situation. How do we know if someone's really understanding what we're saying, and how are we building that rapport? And it is true that without that visual aspect, most of the trust we're building is through how we sound. So that's really something to keep in mind when you are talking on the phone, doing any sales, which I think is just kind of interesting. I am going to move on here. So Mark Bowden is an expert in body language. If anyone's ever seen this TED Talk, it's a great TED Talk. He also has some really neat videos on presenting, really short ones on body language in video, and just some great tips and tricks. Maybe we could post this link in the follow-up, Sierra, or maybe in chat, either way. But his TED Talk is on the importance of being inauthentic. What he really says in this TED Talk is that people tend to respond primitively to body language. It's just what we were talking about. They respond emotionally. And he gives some really great tips and tricks about how to attract people, basically using your body language. And this, I think, when he says the importance of being inauthentic, he's not suggesting that we don't be ourselves. We just really need to understand that building trust is 90% body language. Another tip, if anyone ever watches any old Anthony Robbins videos, something he talks about, and I like some of the stuff he says, some of it's a little outdated, but he says that he introduces the concept of mirroring your guest or mirroring your client. And just as a quick example, if someone is more reserved and quiet when I meet them, I want to take note of that and match my energy to them. I don't want to come in loud and boisterous, even if that's the way I'm feeling. Again, I want to enter their world, their energy. So in summary, people like or are responsive to people who mirror them. Mirroring is all about building trust, and it's all about focusing on their world. Similarly, I did want to note, I'll tell you a quick anecdote. You want to dress to mirror your client as well to build trust. As it was mentioned at the top of the webinar, I used to be a hairdresser. I was a hairdresser for 13 years. And in that industry, there's a lot of creative freedom to dress uniquely and I'm going to turn on my video while I tell this story. To dress uniquely and express yourself with unique clothes and hair and makeup. And I really enjoyed that. I took full advantage of that. And when I left the industry and moved into what I would call software consulting sales, I knew I would have to change my attire a little bit, and I would have to change my approach. But I still have this strong pull to be myself, right? The whole, I don't want to be inauthentic, and I enjoy expressing myself that way. So not long after I started, I entered a meeting with my mentor, a colleague of mine, and I was wearing just a simple black and white outfit, but I chose to put on some giant, and I'm talking from ear to shoulder, red earrings, because I thought that would just pop the outfit. And she very softly and very in a great way mentioned that it was really distracting. And if the purpose of the meeting was to meet the client's needs, that even though they're just big earrings, that they could maybe cause the client to lose a little bit of trust in me because I'm not mirroring them and I'm really making it about me, not their needs. So that was a really interesting perspective for me to really think about the world of my client, even visually as I dress. So I'm going to stop that. So I encourage everyone to check out The Importance of Being Inauthentic, that TED Talk. So finally, to summarize on these 3 V's, the visual, verbal, and vocal, how we communicate influences our clients in 2 ways. Emotionally, if we mirror them properly, we're going to affect them emotionally by expressing good intent, genuine interest, a positive emotional state, and genuine warmth. This is genuineness. With our words, we're going to affect them logically, right? This is thinking. We're going to affect them by speaking clearly and intelligently about our services and product. And then we demonstrate credibility and competence as well when we speak as an expert. So let's move on to questions and preparing the right questions. So before you begin with a client, I recommend that you really understand what you want them to know and feel and do, right? So even though you're preparing to their world, you need to have a desired end result in mind. What do you want them to know about your product or service? How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? So me, for example, when I talk to a prospective client, I want them to know that the software I sell them can help them solve problems. That's what I want them to know. I want them to feel that the software has extra value for the price because of what I add to it, because of what I can offer as a consultant. That's what I want them to feel. So trust, right? And I want them ultimately to buy my services and sign up. So I have my desired end result in mind. Now I'm going to use strategic questions to dig into what the client needs. What I mean by strategic questions is these are questions that are going to that are selected to help uncover what they need, what their goals are, and what their business situation is, so I can offer the most relevant, valuable solution. This can be challenging because I have to deliberately decide not to talk about everything about my business. I have to listen to what's most relevant and valuable. So a couple types of strategic questions. I'm going to blow through these a little bit. Closed-ended questions. These are your basic yes or no answers. So these are just information, trying to get a little bit of background. So in my situation, I might ask them, are you hiring? Do you have turnover? If so, how much? Have you tried a behavioral assessment tool before? This is just really good information so that I know where to head. Now we have open-ended questions. These are who, what, where, when, why, and how. Or not why, I guess. That'll come next. But what challenges do you face with your current process? So I'm opening the questions up just a little bit more. How would you like to see things improve? What's your biggest point of pain? Sometimes I like to ask clients that if it seems appropriate, because then it just gets right to, they can just tell me exactly what the biggest point of pain is, so I can solve that problem. And then finally, we have investigative questions, and these are probably the most important because they get to the why. So these are explain, tell, share, help me understand. These are describe what you're hoping to see as a result. Tell me about your goals for this year. Help me understand your current process. This graphic is just a simple graphic to show how much of each question you should really be asking your client. And you can start with investigative. I would always start with an investigative, like tell me about your situation. And then you can use open and closed questions to clarify. But you really want to let them do the talking. So the best practices in questioning is to be clear and concise, have your goal in mind, start with an investigative question, use the other questions to clarify. But really, more investigative questions than not. Ask each question once and then listen. We're going to talk about listening in a minute. Don't tag question on question. Reframe to gain additional information. We'll talk about that as well. And then ask about the future, not just today. Because building the long-term relationship, we're not just talking about this sale right now. We're talking about building a relationship so I know how I can serve them in the future as well. So listening and responding is the next step in building trust and respect in any type of relationship, but absolutely in a sales relationship. I think a lot of people think listening can be easy, and for some it really is, but you really can't just listen, as we talked about before. You really have to demonstrate that you're listening, and you have to do that when you address what they're saying. So really quickly, some poor listening habits, these are common things that people just do because maybe they're nervous or you just want to make sure you're prepared. But private planning and rehearsing can bite you in the end because you're more likely to address your own agenda, not theirs. If you don't take time to listen to what they really need, you're more likely to just to say what you rehearsed, which who knows what their true needs are without listening to them. Prejudging is, I think of this as thinking as they're talking and thinking, oh, this person isn't going to want to buy my product. I'm going to get another no. It's kind of just looking at them and listening to them without really listening and just making a judgment ahead of time about whether or not they're going to buy your product or service. And then selective listening, just hearing what you want to hear again, or just thinking about what you're going to say next and not really listening. So really good listening takes 100% focus on what the client is saying. You have to be truly present. And I think the best way to demonstrate that you're truly present and listening is to summarize what they need. And this is just responding. So for example, I might listen to my client and then ask a lot of investigative questions, maybe a few closed and open questions to get more clarification. And then I would say, based on what you described, hiring is your top concern. You're getting candidates that will interview well, but show up on day one as a different person. You'd like to understand who's truly in front of you in an interview so you can hire the right person for the job. Does that sound right? And then I can move on. I'm going to say the quote. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Leslie. Listen to understand, not to respond. Perfectly stated. So then I might say, so great, this is, if I did understand right, then I can say, well, here's how our assessment tool takes the guessing out of the interview process. Another way you can demonstrate that you've understood, you can leverage links. So this is using their own words and linking it to what you can offer. So for example, you mentioned earlier that you're having trouble hiring. Let me explain to you how my tool can help you with that. You mentioned earlier you're having trouble with your management team. Let me explain how I can help your managers understand their team better. This is key in figuring out what's most important to them. I'm going to pause here and see if anyone has any questions or comments. So far, we've talked about building trust and respect by first impressions, by asking great questions, and by listening. So in summary, I'm not quite done here. We're going to talk a little bit about follow up and follow through. But when you're building trust in any relationship, like I just said, it's really about making sure that you're addressing them from their world. And you want to do that by making sure that they meet you in an emotional place where they respond positively. That's how you're going to build trust and respect. With your actions, you're going to build trust and respect by asking great questions and really listening to understand what they need. So finally, I think in building trust and respect, you really need to concentrate on following up and following through. I really can't stress this enough as far as building a long-term relationship, and you won't believe how much this makes a difference in building trust and respect before, during, and after a sale. I would say that sometimes this ball gets dropped during the sale, but most often it's after, and you really won't build a long-term relationship without follow through. I've worked with several people that have stopped working with other people because they just didn't follow through with information, not just requested information, but just general information. So definitely follow up with information you promised, but you also want to follow up on support and regular check-ins. I had someone, a client, mentioned to me that a previous associate didn't let them know about new stuff that was coming up. And it's not like she asked for that information, but just by anticipating the needs of that client, she would have liked to have just known about the information. So that's just keeping in touch, checking in, and asking if they need anything. Follow up with introductions to new products and services. That was the example I just gave. Follow up on anything that you said you would do. Follow up on anything you said you would do. If you said at the end of a phone call, I'm going to email you and summarize this phone call, make sure you do that. Every little thing that you say you would do, make sure you do it. I know it sounds obvious, but I just really can't stress it enough. And then after you've landed your sale, that's when the real work of relationship building begins. Always remember that when you land the sale, you're excited, you're happy, you feel like you've solved their problem and they're ready to go. But the real work in building that relationship continues as you follow up with them. I did want to touch a little bit up on expanding relationships. We're not really spending a lot of time on this, but expanding your relationship after you've closed the sale is important for future success. So you really want to make sure that you stay in touch with everybody. Always be assessing their current situation, how they're enjoying your product or your service. Identifying areas for expansion, that's if you're offering new services or products, and customizing that for each client. You know, I look at all my different clients and their needs are all different, so I try and target workshops or other software products that they can use to help solve their individual problems. Expanding relationships is asking for referrals. If you have rapport and trust with your client, they'll be happy to talk about you and even reach out to people about you. Leveraging success stories. This is really important. I think a lot of times people don't want to talk about their own success because it sounds like bragging, and that can be challenging for a lot of folks. But if you don't talk about your successes, then nobody knows that you had them. So I want to encourage everyone to keep track of your success stories and highlight them in some way. If it's on a website or LinkedIn or a newsletter, just to show people that your product or service is working. It makes people feel really good. And you can do that to just let your current client base know that you're successful and that they're on a really great team. And you can use this as success stories to help land new business. And then, of course, networking. Networking, whether you like it or not, is all about exposure. And, you know, I recommend evaluating the return on investment for networking. You know, sometimes it's beneficial to go to everything. Obviously, we can't do that now. But it's really about signing up for, you know, different organizations that help give you the kind of exposure you want to the right audience that you want. And that will help basically expand your business relationship with the community. So that is all I have for right now. Thank you so much for your time. I thought maybe we could open up for some questions. How do you combat being lazy, working from home, and getting your sales goals? That's such a great question. So the way that I do that personally is I'm a big fan of systems. And basically I use good old-fashioned lists. to make sure that I know exactly what my goals are, and I check them off when I've completed them. I hope that's not too simplistic of an answer, because it's really challenging right now when you're at home and you don't have the energy of other people or what used to motivate you to make your sale or to get out there. And we also have to be, we have to think differently, because maybe we used to do a lot of in-person meetings and now we have to do a lot of phone meetings, and that's not quite as exciting. So um, I think to combat being lazy for me, I make sure that I have a system. So I have my goals in front of me, and good old fashioned reward. When you hit your goals, go ahead and reward yourself. Have that donut or whiskey, or buy yourself something new or something like that. So you can maybe hold yourself accountable in that way. If you can, have an accountability partner that you can share your list with and have them check in up on you to make sure you're doing what you said you were doing. I hope that answers that question. And if you have any more specifics, we can ask that. You're welcome. That is such a good question right now. Let me ask this to the group, since we have a few more minutes. What challenges are you facing right now that we can't be in person? Is anyone having a particularly challenging time with their sales goals? Obviously, economics are tougher right now because of COVID, but is anyone want to talk a little bit about what they're doing differently? I'll use myself as an example while people maybe are chatting. We do, as part of our services, we do a lot of training, and traditionally they were all in person, and of course those have gone to zero now in person. So we've really had to think about virtual training, which Sierra and I were talking about is not the same. It's just really not the same. You can't get the same read on people with a camera like this than you can in person. I think we're going to get used to it and it's going to get better, but we really had to think about attention span and, how do we condense the training so that we're not in front of a screen for 6 hours. So we've as a team really had to wrap our minds around that. And I have to say that it's gone well so far. We've been offering some trainings and we've had some people take us up on it, but I will say I'm going to be glad when we can be in person again. I quickly pivoted to Zoom workshops from in person, and it was wildly successful. And now I'm finding virtual burnout for myself and my clients. Any tips or ideas? Oh, that's such a great question, because there's all sorts of articles and facts out now where people are just burning out on Zoom. And I think it's also really hard to maintain attention span on Zoom the more we use it. So let's see, Zoom workshops. I don't know how many, here's an idea. I don't know how many people would be in a training, but if you could figure out, as we open up a little bit more, a fun way to do a socially distanced training, that might be good. I'm just spitballing here, but maybe you could organize some events that are outside and socially distanced. I'm not sure what your line of work is. Obviously, if it's technological, that could be challenging. I think the other thing with Zoom and keeping burnout low is to just shorten time frames of everything. If you normally did 90 minutes, make it 45 and maybe a little bit more frequent, or see if you can just deliver all that information in 45 minutes. If anyone else has any great ideas. Challenge, digital, text, and email communication. With messaging, people can put their own vocal emotion into the language. Any ideas? So what I'm hearing you say, Ben, is that it's hard to get the emotional message. Yes. Okay. So it's hard to read people's emotion in text and email. Absolutely. I think that with text and email, the best way to communicate is to be as clear as possible, and to really model with your communication and make sure that you're taking time and not writing like you're speaking in your head. We probably have to go back to writing a little bit more traditionally, where we use, full sentences and proper grammar. I don't know if this is tackling what you were saying, but I know that sometimes if I shoot off a quick email that's just like me speaking in my head, a lot of time the message can get misunderstood. But if I write out bullet points and a clear desired end result and a clear request for response, then I get a better response. I think with text and emailing, communication just has to be over communication. We have to over communicate a little bit more now than we would if we were doing it face to face. Let me see here. Cold calling, texting, and email is tough for sales. It is so tough for sales. I think that's a huge challenge. And I think that the way to make that easiest is, again, to set goals for now. And I'm not exactly sure what your business is, Hope, but if you have any way to narrow down leads, that would be great, because then you can get to know your audience a little bit more, and you can target those to people that you think are more interested in your product or service than just cold calling random numbers. Cold calling can be really demoralizing, because, yeah, you get a lot of rejection. So if there's a way that you can figure out and narrow down leads a little bit more, that would be my suggestion for that situation. Real estate. Oh, sure. With real estate, that is tough right now. I think I have a couple of friends in real estate right now, and I think this is the time, Hope, to go back to your client base and just foster and build and strengthen those relationships, because referrals from them is going to be a great source. And also, just in the long term, when those folks, you know this already, but when those folks are ready to sell or buy, they're going to think of you. You just want to stay in the front of their mind. So I would say right now is a great time to build, not just build, but really grow and maintain those relationships with your previous clients. Good ways to advertise: social media, better or worse ways. I'm not a marketing person, but what I think about advertising is exposure. Again, going back to exposure, you really want to find the medium or the ways that you're going to reach your audience the most. So if most of your audience is on social media, then that is a good way to advertise. If most of if they're not, then maybe that's not a good way to advertise. Social media can be a really good way to maintain relationships and let people know your success stories. So I do recommend a minimal amount of social media, just to let your current client base know that you're doing stuff and that you're out there. But spending your advertising dollars is a different thing. So you really want to think about where, the return on investment in that regard. So I would just really examine where your audience is and spend those dollars in that area if you can. I know that's a really vague answer. So there was an important message in the chat earlier. I encourage everyone to reach out to me if you have additional questions. I really hope that you will. My assessment tool is really fun and a great way to understand your own strengths and weaknesses. So I encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us, Anna.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. It was really fun for me to think about this and assemble it, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so everyone who attended today will get an email from us with that complimentary offer from Anna. The best way to set that up is honestly just contact her. So her information is in the chat as well as on your screen. So a quick email or a phone call will get you connected.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.